India was called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire because it was the core of British power. Their entire strategy was based on the supply lines to the Indian subcontinent. And it was in this period that Vladimir Lenin famously said that India was the supply depot of humanity. He may have exaggerated on that, but it does show the importance of India. The Indian subcontinent, which includes not just India, but also Pakistan and Bangladesh, is one of the most ancient places on earth. In fact, the Indus Valley located in Pakistan is one of the birthplaces of civilization. The Ganges river system in northern India is an extremely strategic river system, comparable to the Mississippi River in the US. And the Ganges Delta, located in Bangladesh, is one of the most fertile lands in the world. The subcontinent is home to more than 2,000 ethnic groups, unified by their religions and common values, and manifested in 3 independent states. The largest of those countries is India, which has a growing economy that ranks among the top in the world. Its population numbers around the 1.2 billion and is still growing. But what shapes India and how does it work? To understand the geopolitics of India, we need to look at the Indian subcontinent. This region is a self-contained world. It is geographically isolated on most of its borders. In the southeast you've got the Bay of Bengal, in the southwest you've got the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. To the west there are a number of mountainous ranges, and the further north you go, the higher the mountains become. It starts with the Sulayman Range, which connects to the Safid Mountains, and that is connected to the Hindu Kush, which in turn connects to the Karakorum Range, and this finally becomes the Himalayas. Now the Himalayas stretch to the east for about 2,400 kilometers and then continue as the Arakan Range and expand to the south, right at the border of Myanmar. This geographic layout effectively makes the Indian subcontinent like a castle, surrounded by walls of mountains. Pakistan is in the western region of the Indian subcontinent. The country is a major modern remnant of the Muslim rulers over medieval India. The Indus River runs right through the country and unites the nation not just in trade and commerce, but also in culture. It was the trade through the Indus River system that allowed Islam to quickly spread throughout the region. Now, Pakistan and India have a long history of animosity towards each other, but the two countries are separated by the Thar Desert and swamps in the south. The only real contact point between the two is in the region of Punjab. About half of Pakistan's population is located in this region, including its capital, Islamabad. And this region is not just the heartland of Pakistan, but it spreads throughout the northern regions of the subcontinent and is known as the Northern Plains. And this heartland is shared by Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. It is one of the most populous places on earth, home to about 1 billion people. To the east of the Northern Plains lies Bangladesh. This Muslim-majority state is located in the Ganges Delta. It is one of the most fertile lands in the world. But the problem here is that the country is mainly situated at sea level, and without proper dams, Bangladesh frequently experiences floods from the Bay of Bengal. Now, in between Pakistan and Bangladesh lies India, and although the majority of India's population shares the northern plains with its neighbors, India has other large population areas as well, especially in the south of the peninsula. Now, the irregular spread of population density has to do with the availability of water and the quality of soil. When you have both of these resources in an area, that region's population accumulates and grows. That's why all of India's major cities are centered around the river systems of Ganges, Brahmaputra, Narmada, etc. It is this diversity of rivers, lands, and populations that allowed for the development of distinct cultures like the Punjabis, Gujaratis, Marathis, Tamils, Bengals, etc. These ethnic groups formed their own kingdoms, and historically the Indian subcontinent was highly fragmented. The internal political boundaries that existed shifted continuously and dramatically, and the reason for this was simple. Other than a few large rivers and the Thar Desert, the subcontinent had no geographical barriers, and this allowed for armies to quickly march to the enemy's base and to quickly establish a new kingdom, and in a short time that kingdom would just as quickly be conquered by another kingdom. and this went on for centuries. This divided landscape created opportunities for foreign powers to divide and conquer India, and that is exactly what happened. Between the 11th and 18th century, India was ruled by Muslims. The most famous of these were the Mughals. Now, the Mughal emperors were very efficient in their rule. They did not use force to conquer India. Instead, they took advantage of the disunity and made coalitions with the native powers and slowly expanded their influence. This form of soft power projection was based on the fact that the internal resentment between Indians was much greater than their relations with the outsiders. This strategy worked so efficiently that when the British arrived, they adopted as well. The British stationed a very small force in India in comparison to its size. The truth is that the British didn't really conquer India, they just managed the internal conflicts to their advantage. Even the modern Indian government governs in the same way, and this is one of the fundamental problems of India: the authority of the government versus the autonomy of the states. This is not a country of one culture, one language, one ideology. India is unique and has its unique problems. That being said, Indian nationalism is very strong and it counters the separatist tendencies. But the lack of a strong central government prevents economic growth and doesn't allow for reforms. India is officially a republic, but it works like a federation, and in some cases even like a confederation. Some Indian states just don't want to cooperate with other states, and this hurts the country's infrastructure, agriculture, resource management, etc. It is this kind of federal governance that holds India back. But the country also faces other political issues. Apart from the Pakistan-India hostilities, modern India has faced limited external threats. Its two other neighbors in the north, Nepal and Bhutan, pose no risk. On the other side of the Himalayas lies China, and this is where it gets complicated. Many analysts say that India and China are potential rivals, but the reality is that their power projections are very limited. China's main population centers are surrounded by buffer states like Inner Mongolia, Manchuria, Uyghurstan, and Tibet. This means that the core of China is invulnerable to a land attack, and that is what makes Tibet such a sensitive and strategic issue. If Tibet were to become independent, it would ally with India, and then India would be a significant threat to China. And that's why New Delhi has for a long time supported the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan independence movement. And that's why the Chinese are always so suspicious when it comes down to Tibet, and they see India's support to the Dalai Lama as a hostile act. The Chinese response was to form a communist insurgency in India. More than 10,000 people have died since the fighting began, and this is the biggest internal conflict in India. Another Chinese response was to support the communist movement in Nepal. Although the country has shown no hostile reactions to India, the communist influence in Nepal is China's counter to India's Tibet policy. Basically, India and China have no means to directly confront each other, and that's why they use proxies like Tibet and Nepal to accomplish their goals. The entire Chinese-Indian frontier runs through the highest elevation of the Himalayas. That means that no large army can cross it, and maintaining those supply lines in the long term is almost impossible. The only major clash between India and China occurred in 1962, and this was an inconclusive war. The Chinese gained a military victory, but Indian nationalism surged, and the country's diverse population was united more than ever. So in the end, this really helped India to form its own unique identity. One more territorial dispute between Beijing and New Delhi lies in the northeastern state of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, this dispute has never really escalated, but it does show the vulnerabilities of India. If China manages to form a strategic partnership with Bangladesh, just like the Chinese-Pakistani partnership, then India will be facing two external threats on opposite sides. And that is why India is so suspicious when it comes down to the expanding Chinese naval influence in the Indian Ocean. Also important to note is that the Bangladeshi front may actually be more dangerous to India than the Pakistani front, because between the Chinese-backed Nepal and Bangladesh lies the narrow corridor that connects the bulk of India with the Assam region. If Bangladesh, Nepal and China joined up, they could manage to cut the Assam region from the rest of India. and things would only get worse from there. Bangladesh is located on the Ganges Delta and is very close to the Indian heartland. Things become even more complicated if you take into account that a significant amount of ethnic Bengali people live on the Indian side of the country, known as West Bengal. In the past, there have been proposals of a unified Bengal, but none of them succeeded. Still, the very idea of a greater Bangladesh strikes at the very core of India. The Chinese-Indian rivalry doesn't end there. Perhaps the biggest ongoing issue is connected with Kashmir. Now, this conflict has a lot of emotional and symbolic elements, but the strategic element is quite simple. The more lands Pakistan controls in Kashmir, the stronger and deeper Pakistani-Chinese relations will become, and in the long term this poses a significant threat to India. So that's why India wants to control all of Kashmir, as to cut off the Pakistan-Chinese partnership and render it obsolete. So Kashmir is critical to the long-term strategy of both Pakistan and India. As for Indian power outside of the subcontinent, that is simply not worth it. Most of the neighboring regions are sparsely populated with insufficient resources like water and fertile land, and thus cannot support a larger population. So that's why India has not demonstrated any appetite for power beyond the subcontinent. These potential security risks bring us to the national interest of New Delhi. India's geopolitics is based on the geographic elements. First, the country needs to make some serious political and economic reforms. It needs to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, and it needs to counter the communist insurgency and restrict the Hindu right wing. India also needs to find new resources to sustain the growing consumption. The country also needs a more efficient form of bureaucracy and government rule. Aside these issues, India needs to develop a much better navy, because a centralized Indian state will have to protect its sea trading routes and prevent any kind of invasion from the sea. And to do that, they need a strong navy, one that can compete with the Chinese. Now, this is going to be an extremely expensive investment, but one that India urgently needs. But India also needs formidable land and air forces to secure its borders. The geographical barriers is the first line of defense, and once those are breached, the northern plains will be quickly occupied by an external power that will cripple India. So the country needs to acquire more advanced military technologies, and yet it needs to be discreet about its military strength. Also, India needs to forge much closer relations with its neighbors. The best way to accomplish that is to accommodate Bangladesh and Pakistan and develop good relations based on trade and development. One thing that India can do to help Bangladesh is to build dams and other hydropower projects. This would lay the foundation of long-term strategic relations and give no reason to Bangladesh to ally itself with China. As for Pakistan, New Delhi can try the diplomatic road and repair its relations with Islamabad and find a step-by-step solution to the Kashmir conflict. But this is an unlikely scenario, because if India wants to eliminate the Chinese influence, then India needs to control Kashmir and cut China and Pakistan from bordering each other. So Pakistani and Indian relations will remain tense. If India manages to overcome these issues, it will turn into a stable, prosperous, and formidable regional power. This was a Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. Thanks for watching, and Saul.